Hi, and welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Today's episode is kind of, special because it's about Kiss riffs. So we're actually going to go through the 70s albums, and we've picked a favorite riff off of each album from the debut to Dynasty. And we'll talk a little bit about the albums, and maybe you can chime in with comments about your favorite riffs and so on.
All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. We're just a bunch of Kiss fans and we talk Kiss. So come along for the ride, you've got nothing to lose.
Let's start off with the first album. The first album was released in 1974. It didn't get a great reception. I guess not too many people bought it. What do you think about the first album, Mark?
Like, it's almost like a greatest hits before they were even known, right? But sonically, it's one of those records where, as a guitar player, you look back and say, man, I wish they would have just had a little bit more of a ballsier guitar sound, or I wish they would have maybe played it a few beats per minute quicker. Some of them were a little slow. But, it's an important record. It was the start of Kiss. You can hear the fire and the desire from those guys. They wanted to make a big record, and they wanted to, or they just wanted to make a record, period, that they wanted to do, and get out there and start getting involved in the game, as they say, right? What about you, Daniel? What do you think of the record?
Well, the problem for me was always the sonics. I could never really get into the album, so for me, Alive, filled that void. I always enjoyed, for example, Firehouse on Alive. If you compare that version to the studio version, it is exactly as you said. The studio version is so slow and lethargic. I do recognize that there are great songs on the album, but I don't listen to it. I go to other sources for that material. But let's kick things off. You've picked a riff from the first album. Which song are we going to listen to?
Ironically enough, I'm going to play the riff to the song, excuse me, that you just said that you like the Alive version better, and that's Firehouse. I've always thought this was an interesting song, and having just listened to Paul Stanley's audiobook recently, it's interesting to note that he wrote this song when he was like 15 years old. So, it's not like he was a very seasoned guitar player, but it's not a hard riff, and it goes something like this. So he throws in that little riff in there in between, right? But there's also one other little variation I'll just show really quickly where he does that. He goes, and he goes to the D there. So he just throws in these little riffs here and there. So initially the riff goes, and what Paul seems to do a lot of the times live, and it's live, it's a different situation, so he kind of plays it really simple, like. He doesn't even play the underneath tone because there's two notes there, so it's like an A, and then he does like this inversion, right? But he never hardly plays that live. He just plays like a 12-bar blues, like that way. So he kind of simplifies it for live purposes, right?
It was maybe the hardest album to only choose one from, because you got a lot of cool stuff like the first song, of course, Strutter. There's a lot of cool stuff there. They always said they were inspired by like horn players when they came up with that riff. That's kind of cool. And I also like, Ace Frehley had a cool song on this album. Cold Gin.
Yeah.
One of his best ever, I think. And some of the songs are I even enjoy that simple one. What's it called? Let me know. That's a pretty fun song, and of course we must mention Black Diamond. That's a cool. So there's a lot of cool stuff on the first album, but I actually went with one of the tracks that they always open the show for years with, and that's Deuce by Gene Simmons. He said it was inspired by Rolling Stone song when he did that one. Yeah, and Bitch is something like. Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't. They're quite similar, but not that similar, I think.
Yeah.
So Deuce, it starts off with that stuff with Paul. Baby, if you're feeling good, you know your man is working hard. He's worth a deuce. That's a all-time classic. So the first album contains lots and lots of cool riffs, but they didn't just release one album in '74. They actually released 2 albums, and the other one is called Hotter Than Hell.
Yes.
What do you say about Hotter Than Hell? It's a bit different in feel than the first album.
Yeah, I mean, Hotter Than Hell was interesting because, okay, you got to remember, the first record was done at Bell Sound in New York City. New York City being the home of Kiss, so they were used to the area, used to the surroundings. Then they go to do a record. You know, they're kind of told, you know, we need a record pretty quickly because the other album stalled. So they go to Village Sound Recorders in Los Angeles area, or I think it's Sausalito or somewhere in there in California. And a totally different studio, different environment. Luckily, they brought the same 2 people. Well, some people would say unluckily, they brought the same 2 people, but Ken Kerner and Richie Weiss. But they had a lot of trouble with this. I mean, the songs are pretty good. They had a lot of songs that were still left over from the earlier sessions, like Watching You and Going Blind they had. And they had, you know, Let Me Go Rock and Roll they had already. But they had to write a couple of other songs and come up with other stuff, like Going Blind. That was an older Gene song that they had. But the main problem with this album is the sonics of it. I mean, it's probably one of the worst sounding records you'll ever hear from a Kiss album. And a lot of people say that, oh, I like it, it sounds so Black Sabbath-y. But the whole thing with that is they were going through a lot of equipment changes, the studio was. They were saying that they were changing the monitors on a daily basis there, which is not good because one of the first things anybody will teach you in the recording business is that get yourself a good pair of monitors and get used to listening to them through them, because that's going to be how you judge all your sounds and how you get your sounds and how you EQ things. And if you're changing your speakers all the time, you're never going to get a chance to get used to anything, and you think it's going to sound good on this speakers, and you put them on something else and it sounds terrible because you're not used to the sonics of those speakers yet, right? And that's clearly what happened on this record. I mean, it sounds very muddy. Some of the songs just totally, you know, get killed because of that, and 1 or 2 songs actually maybe benefit from it.
Going Blind on this album, it doesn't sound good. I mean, for me, it was not until, you know, when they started playing Unplugged in the 90s where I understood the magic of that song. It sounds so great unplugged. My pick from this album could easily be like Hotter Than Hell, the song. That's pretty cool. Or Watching You is a cool riff. So, but for me, it was actually the bass line in Going Blind. Stands out when you hear the MTV Unplugged stuff, because when they play that chorus, 'cause I think I'm going blind. There's a little cool guitar stuff there. And I know how it should be.
But the tone overall is very dark, right?
Yeah. So I think one thing with that song is pretty cool that it's sort of a ballad, but it feels really dark, like a lot of other songs on Harder Than Hell. For example, Ace has a real simple song on the album. Come to think of it, most of the rhythm guitars on Ace Frehley's songs are real simple. You would guess that he would make it a bit more spectacular, but it's most of the time it's just power chords like. Strange ways.
Yeah.
That one, for example.
Definitely.
So Going Bang was my pick. What about you then?
Well, I definitely think that one of the songs that benefited from this sound that they got under was Parasite. And it's always been a song that I really loved from the record, and it's one of those songs that I really enjoyed when I first heard it on a live, of course, as well. And when I got the videotape of them live in Cobo Hall in in Detroit, I loved seeing that version of it. And I mean, the riff in itself is not anything too difficult overall. I mean, it's just. Which is just 1, 2, and 3, just syncopated, right? And then you got the other riff. He goes into the solo part, right? Gene did a lot of like unison parts, which basically, if people who don't know what that means, unison is where you play the same notes as the other person. So he doesn't harmonize it, he doesn't do an octave higher, he usually just plays the same thing. So he would play, or he might play it an octave higher. Right.
Yeah.
As long as you know your G pentatonic. Like all those little licks that he does, it's all in the pentatonic space, right? So as long as you know how to do like, then you'll be fine. You can even improvise a solo over that if you don't want to do it his way. Just keep it in G and then you're fine, right?
I always thought that song sounded so good live. Every era that played it, from '75 in Winterland, and the Revenge era lineup played it real cool in the '90s, and it sounded pretty cool with Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer as well. So great pick, Mark. I love that song. So the next year, '75, they released another album before they broke through with the Alive album. But the next one is called Dressed to Kill.
Yes.
Sort of a different vibe, more of a pop album, I would say. And once again, they went back and found some gems, from way back. Like, have you ever heard that version of She that they did with Rick and Lister?
Yes, with the flutes and all that.
With the flutes and all,
Unbelievable.
It doesn't sound like a Kiss song at all, but they really managed to turn it into a cool, dark, mean Kiss song on this album. So what are your thoughts on Dressed to Kill?
I really like Dressed to Kill. I mean, Dressed to Kill was one of those records where, believe it or not, it was one of the records that I got much later in my collecting of the CDs or even the vinyl, because I just, for some reason, sort of bypassed that record. And sort of now looking back at that, or thinking back to that, it was a mistake because there's so many great songs on there. And the big thing on there that I found interesting was how much the Sonics like improved just unbelievably. From Hotter to Hell to that was like a night and day thing. And I mean, you know, people will say, oh, you know, Neil Bogart took over the reins. And the one thing I think Bogart did that was smart was he kept the songs kind of short to the point. And I mean, you know, Paul says in his book that they did that because he wanted to save money. He didn't want them to do a lot of takes, so they kept it short. But you know, they were the ones who were writing the songs. So even if he wanted them to only do 1 or 2 takes. If they wrote a 6-minute song, he would probably still let them do 1 or 2 takes of it. So they were writing shorter material. It was to the point. And Dave Whitman, the guy who engineered that record, that Electric Lady with them, did a great job. I mean, those guitar sounds are fantastic. Again, definitely Marshalls. There's also rumor of an Ace Frehley sort of little small amp that he brought in, like a little 5-watter that he might have used, like a Champ, like a Fender Champ amplifier. And you know, Gene used a small Ampeg 15-watt bass. But the thing is, in a studio, it doesn't matter. You can come into a 5-watt amp, as long as you put a microphone in front of it, you can make that amp sound just as huge as anything else, because you can just put the mic on, turn it up, and when you mix it in with the grand scheme of things, you would never even know it was a 5-watt amp, right? So it sounds fantastic. They did great sonics with it. And I think the vocals sound very clear, but the guitar playing on there is great. It's very simple, to the point. And because the sonics are so clear, you can make out all the little nuances and all the little tricks that they're playing. I decided to play Getaway, right? So I played guitar since I was 16 years old. I turned 50 like last year or so, and so that's a long time playing guitar. And I've started getting arthritis. I've gotten it for a little while, but it's gotten pretty bad in some of my hands. I mean, if you look at my fingers, some of these ones are a little goofed up. Now, when it goes to this part and it kicks in, he does this thing on there where he expands it, where he goes, oops. So he does like this little stretch, right?
Yeah.
And that, because of the way my fingers are in my arthritis, I can't reach that anymore with my finger. But I just wanted to explain it to it. But you can still get away with playing it with. And then the verse part is just simple. I gotta get away, get away. So that's basically the whole root of the whole song, is just around that whole thing. And then again, it's back to the all that kind of soloing and lead stuff that he does over top of it. But, you know, the song is like, what, 2 minutes, 20 seconds long, basically. So with a song like that, and that has such a catchy chorus to it, and, you know, you have Peter Criss singing it too, which is another added bonus, because it's a voice that you don't hear very often on a record. So it immediately catches your attention. But those riffs are simple, to the point. It's very stock rock and roll. I mean, it's all 12-bar blues and stuff like that. So it's very easy to learn. I mean, anybody out there who's watching this, I guarantee if you know basic chords from, you know, guitar playing from lessons, you can play this no problem. I mean,
I'm not a guitar player. I just play for fun. You're more of a guitar player. But for me, that was the thing. You know, you heard the album and you could emulate the stuff. Even though you weren't that skilled, you were able to play the rhythm guitar of, you know, almost every song on the first at least 3 records. It's actually one of my favorite albums, one of my first albums actually. I found it on a flea market and you know, went home and listened to it. This, of course, is a cool song. You know, Come On and Love Me. Paul has a lot of great songs on this one. Love Her All I Can. that's a cool one. But and She, that we mentioned earlier, is a cool song. I actually like the ending of She, but that's not actually on the record. I think it's on one of the songs on the first album, isn't it?
Let Me Know.
Yeah, it's on Let Me Know. It's just a thing they tagged onto the song, like an instrumental part. But it worked much better, I think, on She when they did it live. I think first time I got hooked on it was actually that terrible covers album. What was it called? Kiss My Ass, classic Kiss, regrouped from '94 when Anthrax did it. You know that one. But we can't go through a Riff episode and leave Rock and Roll All Night off. It was one of the songs that opened it up for Kiss, and they ended their career playing the song. And I like Rock and Roll All Night. I've heard it too many times, so I don't go to the record and listen to it. But if you play guitar, it's fun to play. It goes something like. And once again, goes to blues. Way overplayed for us Kiss fans. We've heard it every concert where we've ever been to. We've heard it live. But you can't deny the strength of the song, and it's still played around the world. During soccer games and hockey games and so on. So Rock and Roll All Night is a cool song still to this day. So then we have finished the 3 first albums. After that, Kiss recorded Alive. And became stars, so to speak. So after this one, was it then that they hired Bob Ezrin to do a record? Yeah, and the record is called Destroyer. Most people really like this album. I know it's not one of your favorites. You're a bit against the bells and whistles and the stuff Ezrin added, but you can't deny the strength of some of the songs. I'm sure you were able to find a few that you liked and a riff or two that you can play for us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, like I said before, Bob Ezrin as a producer I don't have an issue with. I just have an issue with Bob Ezrin as a Kiss producer. All you need to do is just listen to a Live 2 or a Live 3 and hear some of the songs that they played in a more live context where they don't have all those extra pianos and glockenspiels and all these other things that they put in there to make it sound like a sort of odd version of the Alice Cooper band with Paul singing or Gene singing. So of course one of my favorite riffs of all time has got to be Detroit Rock City, right? And that again was something, I mean, if you listen to the original demo and the final version, Bob really did help turn this into something that was a lot more of a catchier song and, much more structurally appealing. I mean, the vocals on the original are just so crammed and all over the place. I couldn't imagine keeping it that way, but the way they did it at the end was much better. But the riffs themselves are really cool. Like, get the part after where they stretch it a bit. that was kind of cool with the, because it's almost like a chord in itself there. Right, so you had that. Oh, sorry. So yeah, it's a very cool solo, and the fact that he got Paul to harmonize it with Ace and stuff. I mean, it was just very well thought out and very well structured. The crash at the end is cool with all the glass exploding and stuff like that. I mean, it's those parts of it I don't mind when you have that kind of cinematic effect, but I think he just sometimes went a little overboard and added a lot of extra stuff that maybe it didn't need, in my opinion, right? And my opinion is just my opinion. It's neither right nor wrong, right? And that's just how it is. So I've always liked songs like that. I mean, and then of course, you have the other stuff like the... Yeah.
I think Detroit Rock City was his best work on that album, Bob Ezrin. I think it was such a good song, and when you compare it to the demo, and we all know that Paul, when he's made a demo, he's not very keen on changing a lot in the demo.
Yeah.
So if Bob Ezrin hadn't been there, it had been a completely different song, and not as good, I think, actually. It was more in the vein of Dress to Kill or a bit simpler. But that's a good example of when Ezrin did something well.
Oh, hey, you're still here, watching or listening. Why don't you hit that subscribe button or click the like one? And if you want even more, click on the join button on YouTube. Thanks for your support.
But I actually picked one other party song. I played Rock and Roll All Night from Dress to Kill. I always thought that Shout It Out Loud was maybe one of the best party songs. And it's also a lot of blues riffing in this one. How goes it? Well, the night's begun, and you want some fun, and you think you're gonna find it. You gotta treat yourself like number one. Do you need to be reminded? Da da dee da da da. Is it old? So I think that's a really cool party song, and I always enjoyed it when Kiss played it live. Real simple, once again they go for that one, but it works so well in these songs, and this is an all-time classic. So I don't think you can find a Kiss fan that dislikes Shout It Out Loud. There's a feel to it, there's a rhythm, and Kiss managed to find magic just with these simple type of riffs. So that's Destroyer. After Destroyer, the same year, they went sort of back to the original sound, a bit raw, a bit meaner, and they released Rock and Roll Over. If you look on my t-shirt, you can see the great cover of that album. Probably my favorite Kiss cover of all time. Great cover. And I know this is one of your favorite albums.
Yes, it is absolutely my favorite Kiss album, period. When I do the rankings, I've done one on my Instagram before where I ranked all the records. Rock and Roll Over is always my numero uno record. It always has been, always will be. And to me, after listening to Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over is exactly the kind of record that I expect to hear. Like that, when I want to hear a Kiss record, that's what I expect to hear. It's very raw. It's party-ish. All the lyrics are kind of what you expect to hear from them. It's very roots rock based. There's a lot of sleazy leads and stuff like that, and the drums sound they don't sound so polished. They sound a little bit more grittier on this record, right? I think Kramer did a great job. I mean, he turned it more into what people wanted to hear. It's almost like he envisioned them being a garage rock band for a minute, just like kind of threw them in a spot and just said, let's record a record almost like you're just jamming in your basement or in your garage with the guys, and it turned out to be really good. I mean, I think it sounds fantastic. I mean, some people have little criticisms here and there. Oh, some people. I remember there was a big article about, are the drums on Rock and Roll Over in stereo? It sounds like mono, and it's like, well, it's not, because if you listen to it on headphones, you can clearly hear the stereo imagery. But people were saying that because sometimes on the record, when Peter does a drum roll, it doesn't sound like it's going across the stereo spectrum when he does it. But that's neither here nor there. Even if it was a mono setup for the drums, it sounds fantastic no matter what. All right, and the guitar sounds are great. I mean, they're back in the New York State area. I know they had to cross the Tappan Zee Bridge. I think they said to go back and forth to the studio, but it was not a huge drive for them. And Ace was a lot more comfortable in this setup, and you can clearly tell he probably brought a lot of his Marshalls in. And this is the time, even starting in Destroyer, where I think they bumped up their amps from sort of the not so much the mid 60s stuff to a lot more like early 70s, like a 71 super lead and stuff like that, in which I do have a Universal Audio called the 68 Lion, which kind of mimics the Marshalls from 1968 to about 1972-ish sounding. If it wasn't the fact that it would take 20 minutes to reconnect everything, I would do it. But take my word for it. The main difference is that while this is the basis of the Marshall sound, this is where the Marshall originated from. That sound is just a touch heavier, a little bit more oomph to the sound, but you can still get away with what we're doing right now with this. It sounds fine with me, absolutely fine. But yeah, that's for all you gearhead guys out there. That's when he started using those ones, and that's when you hear that rumor that Ace used to set his amps all on 5. Everything was 5, treble, mid, bass, everything on 5. Well, it's because those amps started having separate preamp gain and stuff like that, so you could give it a bit more distortion and a bit more drive. And if you just set everything on 5, 100-watt amp on 5 is gonna blow your hair off. It's pretty loud, right? So he got a great sound from it. And one of the songs that I think is fantastic, and the one that I picked, is calling Dr. Love, which is not a very hard song, which is and it's basically just wrapped around those two parts, right? But then, of course, this song has probably one of Ace's best solos. Like all that kind of typical Ace thing that he does, and he does it so great. I mean, as soon as he goes up into like this upper 12 thing. Right, all that kind of stuff, that's Ace territory, 12th fret pentatonic, a 5th fret, and then you can do in the 7th for the relative minor stuff. And he does a lot of that stuff. Right, and he adds a lot of the flangers and stuff like that to it, right? And that's what makes it a great Ace solo. I mean, it doesn't need to be stuff to be a great solo, right? You can just do stuff in a normal, rhythmical structure, and it sounds great. I mean, and that's the thing. If you have a melodic solo that people can remember. I mean, you play that in a big stadium, you have people singing it with you while you're playing it sometimes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yep. Contact Love, what a great pick. I always like that one as well. Sort of a bass line on the chorus on the guitar. I think it's pretty cool. But for me, this record is probably Paul Stanley's greatest hour. It was a hard time when they went on tour. There were so many good Paul songs, so some of them weren't really played live, but you had like I Want You. That's a cool riff, and what else you got? Take Me was pretty cool. Well, I hand in my pocket, down to my pocket. You know that one? That's a cool one. Making Love, I always liked. And the chorus is something like. I never liked really how he sang. Yeah.
It's a very cool riff.
The problem was, I think they never had a real catchy chorus for the cool riffing in that song. So live, he just started to scream love most of the time. Love. Well, that was pretty. So I never really liked the chorus live, but one song that didn't get the chance live really was another one of his gems, and it's called Mr. Speed. Against Take Me, I Want You, Making Love, man, it was up against some tough competition. Paul Stanley, he hit it right out of the park on this album. I love every song that he did on this album. My favorite Paul Stanley album, and one of my favorite albums as well. But I think the riffing from Paul Stanley on this album, he never touched it later on. This was his finest hour when it comes to pure guitar riffs. He managed in the later years to find some cool riffs as well. I always liked that one from Animalize. What's it called? I've had it. That one's pretty cool, and there are a lot, and even on the later albums, Hell or Hallelujah was a pretty cool riff, and what's the Modern Day Delilah, I like those as well, but they were mainly sort of, he almost ripped off his own songs. So let's leave rock and roll over and move on to the next one. 1977, Kiss released a new album once again, Love Gun. And 77, 78, people say that Kiss was at the peak of their popularity during these years, at least in America.
Yeah. And
but I think you can start to see the cracks in the armor sort of on this album. It's weaker than Rock and Roll Over, at least to my ears, and there are some strange choices like adding a cover of Then She Kissed Me. I guess that's some sort of 50s song or something.
Eddie Kramer returns for this album. One of the things that I read, and when you read the books you kind of get the vibe, is that at this point Paul and Gene are starting to more or less trying to produce their songs from the record and kind of just getting Eddie to engineer it, and they're kind of like, you can already kind of tell Paul saying, no, listen, I want to do it this way and this way, because he comes in with Love Gun, which is the song I'm going to play, and that song was completely demoed at Electric Lady by himself and just a drummer guy, and there's very little change from it. I mean, they probably could have released a demo if the drumming was better, right, on that, and it's not complete, right? And then you have songs too, like I Stole Your Love and stuff like that were also another completed song. But the songs that Eddie Kramer had a more a hand in are definitely the ones that Ace and Peter did. Like Hooligan, definitely, you can tell because of the sonics of that one. You can always kind of tell when Eddie had a bit more control over it, because I find that those mixes sound really good. Like Hooligan has a great mix to it. Shock Me has a fantastic drum sound on that and stuff like that. So you can kind of tell Eddie had a bit more magical touch on that, whereas Gene's songs like Christine 16 and Plaster Caster and stuff like that, they're not bad songs, but you can tell that Gene probably wanted, stuff done a bit more his way. Like he played rhythm guitar on Plaster Caster and stuff like that, right? So already you can tell that they're not doing stuff as a quote-unquote band on it, right? So, but Love Gun, again, it's a great riff, nothing out of this world or anything. Basically that over and over again, and then you have those little added parts like the that he adds on top of the verse parts, right? Like that Ace was doing as well. And then of course you have like that kind of solo part, like the oops, right, like all that kind of stuff. And that for Ace is kind of interesting because usually you would expect him to do kind of like a right, but he kind of approaches it from the other end because like he goes up like oops, which is strange because Ace doesn't really like doing the 20-second fret thing, and most people who own a Les Paul don't like doing that either because you have this huge chunk of wood here and it's hard to get your hand in there to get that note, right? Which is why guitars like Jackson's and Charvel's came along that had that much deeper cut down at the bottom, and you can get up to a 24th fret no problem. That's why people love Flying V's, because there's like no wood there at all, you know what I mean? It's like you can just get it right up there. But Love Gun is such a great song. The vocal melody is very strong, the guitar riffs are very memorable, and it's just pretty much all in E, right? So you can just go to town on it. So
the one song that really stood out to me was, I guess, I Stole Your Love. I think that's an awesome song, and you've talked about that riff on a previous episode, that it was kind of a different take for Paul Stanley to play that type of riff. Love Gun is of course an all-time classic, but some of the material is a bit weaker. Shock Me isn't this one? It's pretty cool. Another Ace song. Love that riff. But actually, I picked Christine 16.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of. Isn't there a piano on that song?
Yeah.
Terrible 50s piano.
Yeah.
But I don't know what this type of chord is called, Mark. But I've seen that they use it quite a lot. This one. It's not like a power chord. It's not, Ace always uses power chords. Yeah, I don't know what it's called, but you can see it in a lot of the earlier Kiss stuff. I always like this part. It's like a heartbeat. And then you go. But just this type of chord, you can see it's called a 7th it's called,
Yeah.
because you have it in Firehouse,
Yeah.
and you have it in Black Diamond. Ooh. Then it goes,
Yeah.
and I'm sure, in Almost
And
Human.
also in Rock and Roll Night, that's how it starts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and in Almost Human, it goes like. You know, it's used there, so it's very common in Shout It Out Loud as well. Wait, that's also that chord.
Yeah.
So, very common in early Kiss stuff. You don't hear a lot during the 80s and 90s. Then they started playing different kind of stuff. But it's sort of an interesting thing, a little detail that's very common in early Kiss music. But Christine 16, I think it's a fun song. It's something from left field, but the piano totally kills it for me on the album. But somehow Kiss managed to enjoy this song so much, so they played it during their toughest era, you know, the revenge era, with the exploding Statue of Liberty and all the explosions and unholy war machine. And then they played Christine 16. It was always mind-boggling to me, but it's a kind of a fun song. So that's it for Love Gun, and then we move on to the final studio album, if you don't count the solo albums from the 70s and Kiss. And the final album is Dynasty, and now things start to change quite a bit sonically again. While they had found their sound once again on Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, they used a different producer for Dynasty. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Dynasty, Mark?
Okay, so Dynasty, of course, we're back again in New York City. I believe it's at the record plant in New York City, a very famous recording studio. There was also a record plant in Los Angeles. They were sort of, east and west versions of the studio. Vinnie Poncia came in to do the record. Now, the interesting thing about this, of course, and I'm sure everybody who's a Kiss fan knows the story, Vinnie Poncia was demanded by Peter Criss to do this record. He had done Peter Criss's solo record, and because he had so much fun doing it with Vinnie, he thought, what better way to get my stuff on the record and have a little bit more control than to bring in my favorite producer. And it completely backfired because Vinnie Poncia fell in love with Paul and Gene and their stuff, and he pretty much demanded that Peter don't even play on the album. So that kind of backfired for Peter, absolutely. But he did play on Dirty Living, his song that's on the album, and I do love that song. It took me a while to get to that point where I like it the way I do, because at first I thought it was totally tacky, but now, after listening to it over the years and stuff like that, it's kind of grown on me. But this album, and I know... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, but what do you think about his demo Out of Control that he later used on his later solo album from '80? What do you think about that demo?
I think it was pretty good. I mean, could it have appeared on Dynasty? Absolutely. I mean, I think if Paul and Gene and Vinnie gave it the same sort of attention to detail on there, it could have made a great song as well, right? But maybe it was good that Peter kept it for his solo record, because it turned out to be a good song for that record as well, right? So I think that Peter has been sort of, given the sort of bad look as the writer, because even again on that Paul book that I was listening to, the audiobook version, he can't help but mention that every time Peter brought in a song, it was always with a co-writer, because Peter can't write a song by himself. He can hardly hold a tune in a paper bag. He always had these kind of stupid comments about Peter, how he can't write, he can't sing and stuff like that. But meanwhile, he has probably one of the best voices in the band, period, that guy, right? But now we got this record, and to me, and I know you've heard me say this 1,000 times, but whenever I hear this record, I can't help but think of New York City. It has a very New Yorkish vibe, Ayo, keeping it real in the streets kind of vibe, and it also has that kind of feeling because of the lyrical stuff in there too, like Hard Times, which is the song I'm gonna play, and stuff like that, like Save Your Love, and it just reminds me of New York. And Paul is saying that he did I Was Made for Loving You was a direct result of Studio 54, which was a big New York City thing. So you can see where all the New York influences can come into play, right? Now on this record, very polished production on this for sure. Anton Fig on drums, which gives it a little bit more solid drumming, some more different feel on the toms and stuff like that. But the guitar playing is great, and Ace at this point is very much in his heyday. 3 songs on a record, who would have thought it at this point, And his record did very well, the solo record, so they had a little bit more respect for him and his writing now, and it showed. And the one I'm going to pick, Hard Times, is a classic example again of a riff that's catchy and it doesn't have to be too hard. You have that, and then of course that's the thing that's repeated all the time, but then there's a really kind of interesting little cool part that he does in there where he does the which is just basically D, C, and B, and C, right? But he does it where he does like a D chord, right? But the C is like the C suspended 9 chord, where it's just like a 3 and 3, right? And then he just moves the 3 to 2, and that's how you get that chord, right? So it's very simple, but then again, some of the most catchiest parts in the world are very simple riffs, right? So
hell yeah.
So it sounds really good, and of course at this time he would have probably rolled down the volume a little bit so that it gets a bit more clear, and then he turns it back up, right, and goes up back into the sort of riff. But it's definitely a song that I find extremely catchy. You can, again, when you hear like the stuff he does, out in the streets, da 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 da, like he very much refers back to his youth and how he's happy that he's out of that kind of vibe and city life and has a more normal life now. So it's a very optimistic song, and I think that I love New York City. I've been to New York City several times in my life, and had the pleasure of being in Manhattan a few times, downtown. So those are very strong memories that are imprinted in my brain. So whenever I hear a song like a song from Dynasty, it very much impacts me in that sort of way. And I think that's a great thing. If you can impress something like that on someone as a listener, it's great.
So I never got into Dynasty that much. It took quite a while until I really could see the greatness of some of the songs. One perfect example of that is I Was Made for Loving You, which I didn't really like on the record, but when I heard that Live 3 version with a chugga chugga guitar in the beginning, then it sounded like a metal song. On the album it sounds a bit wimpy to me, but I guess they were trying to get it on radio, and they succeeded. It's probably their biggest hit ever if you look all over the world. It's the most known song. So they managed to do that. But the live I remember watching hockey games and they played this song. And I was always so disappointed that they played the studio version where they had that cool metal version on the live. I never played that one, but I actually picked an Ace Frehley song as well, because if you hear the original of this song, it's 2000 Man. It's a terrible song with the Rolling Stones, but once again Ace did a simple thing, very simple. This is probably one of his simplest songs ever, But it's so fun to play 2000. How is it? Well, my name is number song, and I've been down some my little. Don't you know? Yeah, you know that one. It's like 4 chords in a box here in the middle of the guitar. And it sounds awesome. They actually did it on MTV Unplugged. I don't think that's the best version, but it's fun to play, and it's really easy to sing along to because it's so easy to play. So I think it was kind of cool that he managed to do New York Groove in '78, and then just the year after he did this cool version of a Rolling Stones song, and after that he's done a few more that are kind of cool. But it's so in his, in the Ace vein, so to speak. It's very close to something like Hard Times or something like that. I think he's really good at making these simple songs stand out, and by this point he had gained some confidence. I can't see him bringing 2000 Man in the early 70s and saying to Paul and Gene, hey, I want to sing this song. He needed the time to evolve as a singer, as a guitarist, and get the confidence. And 2000 Man on Dynasty, I think, is a really cool song. And I'm having an affair with a random computer. I guess a lot of guys are in that situation today. So he could foresee the future a bit. So that's a, and of course we have to mention one of Ken's favorite songs. He always talks about charisma.
Yeah.
That's also a cool Gene Simmons song.
Oh yeah,
so
for sure.
There are some gems on Dynasty as well. So on every Kiss album from the 70s, you're able to find stuff that's real fun to play. So to sum things up, what do you say about the 70s catalog when it comes to Kiss? Can you sort of summarize it somehow?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, fantastic picks, Daniel. I really enjoyed listening to you playing some of those
Yours
ones
as well.
Some of those ones were ones that I didn't know, maybe even on guitar, so it's good to hear somebody play them. But I think overall, you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier when you said that one of the things you can definitely pick out that differentiates the 70s stuff from the 80s is that they were doing a lot of this stuff. I mean, rock and roll night. That's like almost a complete overboard of that. It's like, right. So it's very much a lot of those seventh chords in there.
They kind of lost that, didn't they, during the 80s?
Yeah.
I don't think they played that almost at all.
Yeah, in the 80s they were very much more riff-oriented with stuff like, like stuff like that, and they were very much more into like the, like more like, more of the,
The Elder.
Yeah, like stuff like that. Like they even in the early point there, they started going more into like straight ahead power chords, a lot more individual note parts coming in to stuff like that. Like, and then even when they were doing like octave stuff like that. Right, so they were doing that kind of stuff, right? Where they were doubling different guitar things and stuff like that. It's really cool to hear the changes that happened in that time period, right? And also, not that they didn't do it before, but they were doing a lot more homage to their heroes. Like, I mean, modern day Delilah, and even what's that song? What's the other one from Monster? Their opening track there.
You mean Hell or Hallelujah?
Yeah, Hell or Hallelujah is very Deep Purple-ish, and later on, they didn't have any problems, taking those kind of parts and making songs out of them. Whereas earlier on, they kind of tried to hide it a bit more, I thought, right? They didn't want to make it so obvious that they were taking a Raspberry song and turning it into something, you know what I mean? So it's very cool, but I mean, the fact that the one thing that I'm glad that they steered away from is doing covers as a band. Like when they did, the biggest mistake was, of course, with they stayed away from that, and that was good, right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I think the 70s was very influential to a lot of people. A lot of the guitar players that we all know now, like that became big heroes, like Skid Row and Dimebag and all these guys. They grew up on a Live One and Rock and Roll Over and all these things. I mean, some of these guys have those things tattooed on their arms. So I mean, that shows how much they were inspired by it. So the 70s was a very important part of the Kiss history. But a lot of the 80s stuff, I think, is very good as well. Maybe we should probably do an episode like that on the 80s stuff and maybe even the 90s stuff later.
Yeah, that's true. The 80s would be cool to address as well, of course. There's loads of records. In the 90s, you don't have that many records, but you could still... I mean, the one song you mentioned there, Hell, Hallelujah, that's a... I mean, there are cool stuff on the later albums as well. But when it comes to the 70s, I would say it was... The main thing with most of Kiss's songs were that they oozed sort of fun, I think. They sounded fun and happy and, that kind of vibe. During the 80s, they kind of piggybacked off of some of the metal things that were going on, and they did it well. They were great at mimicking that stuff. You have some great records like Lick It Up, Asylum, and some of the others, Creatures of the Night as well. But they kind of lost that fun feeling, I think. There are not too many fun, like Shout It Out Louds or Rock and Roll Nights in the 80s. Maybe a song like Crazy Crazy Nights is sort of in that vein, but not really the same thing. But
they started making serious songs, like you have like a song like... Tears Are Falling. It's such a cool song, but it's very mid-tempo and it's very much more, crying over a woman a little bit more. Whereas the 70s stuff was much more like, I had this woman last night that I had sex with.
Put your hand in my pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
Onto my bucket.
Like Room Service and stuff like that. It was more optimistic and fun. Yeah. Whereas the 80s, it turned a little bit more different.
And of course, it has to do with their age as well. I mean, when you're in your early 20s, you think one way about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When you're in your mid-30s, you might look at it differently. So it was real fun to do this with you, Mark, and listen to your picks as well. And I hope you guys at home feel like you want to grab a guitar and play one of these riffs or other riff from the 70s Kiss, because people always talk about Black Sabbath, the riffs in Black Sabbath or Deep Purple, but there are some cool riffs in the Kiss catalog as well. Sometimes Kiss is overseen by people, and they are not viewed as a riffing, guitar-driven band, but I think they sure as hell are. And just listen to these albums and go and play a Kiss riff.
I think we should definitely do an 80s one like this with a little bit more detail as well, and I think that people will be happy to hear it.
That's it, guys, and maybe we see you again with some 80s stuff in the future, who knows. So from Mark and myself, see you next time.
Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the message board and discuss the topics we've broadcast today. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you've listened to this show, and a like would very much be appreciated. We hope you'll join us again, but until then, remember, life's a radio. Turn it up to 10.
Cause I know how it's be.
nothing more.